For today's interview, we're talking to Christian Schröter from TOPAS Therapeutics in Germany. He's working on a demo case polymeric particle conjugates loaded with small peptides for our project PHOENIX-OITB. Christian, we want to talk a little bit about your demo case. Could you give us a summary of the demo case in your own words, especially for non-experts? What were you working on?
Yeah, so at TOPAS, we want to bring a new treatment modality to patients with autoimmune diseases, where we specifically switch off the non-wanted immune reaction. And for that, we have nanoparticles, like the ones you see up here, right? Little balls which have peptides on top. The little balls are the taxi into the right cells in the liver, and the hair, the peptides on top, are the antigens we use to actually switch off that immune reaction to that very specific antigen. Now, what we do so far is we have iron-based particles. We were in the clinic when that project started with PHOENIX, and these iron particles are wonderful for all R&D purposes. They're stable. You can easily make them. They have high density, good to analyze everything. But then the moment you get into the clinic, iron might become a limitation. It might be the dose limitation or the frequency limitation. So the idea was, to put it in words of some of our investors, just do the same thing without the iron. And that was the starting point. So looking for ways of making nanoparticles, which from the outside ideally look the same, like these up there, but don't contain iron. And that's where the work started with PHOENIX.
Okay, and that was basically the motivation for this demo case, for just replacing the iron?
Yes, and we are now, we will come to that later probably, but we are now almost close to validating these non-iron particles, at least on a preclinical level, to be comparable to the iron particles, which is really cool.
Okay. Yeah, and what do you think the impact will be if you're successful?
These new particles will allow us to have more flexibility in clinical use of the particles. And if you go for production environments, it's a simpler process. It's less costly. It's more standard technology than making iron particles. It's a bit of a specialist way of making particles. Lipid nanoparticles are in anybody's awareness now, being the technology for corona vaccines, for example. So there's a lot of capacity on the market. So there are a lot of benefits for this, and it takes one risk out of our development program. We don't know yet whether the whole program will work and whether it will ever turn out to be a treatment for autoimmune patients, but we take one risk out, and we probably also improve our probability of finding a partner for the next steps of taking this forward.
Okay, well, it sounds like a very interesting approach, and it sounds like you're going to see some success soon. You were a demo case within the PHOENIX-OITB project, and that meant that you had, on one side, funding from the European Commission to do your research. On the other side, you had also access to the services offered by the PHOENIX-OITB. Can you tell us a little bit about how these opportunities affected your work?
So, across the development time we work on this, we had different phases on testing things and finding out what works and what doesn't. In the initial phase, we had a very close collaboration with myBiotech and their labs in actually finding out which kind of particles we can actually make. So the ones we used in the past have a specific polymer to coat the iron. We wanted to use this polymer to move forward. We wanted the particles to look as much the same as the old particles, because that was the overall hope. And together with the services from myBiotech and their support, we were able to test a number of different combinations and see whether the particles work. We were also able to test their specific mixing technology, their microjet technology, compare it to what we had in the lab with a more traditional technology. So that was super helpful, because in the beginning we didn't even know whether it works at all. So having different options to be tested, and also a bit of a broader capacity to do the test was super. In addition, all the analytical help we got from Barcelona, for example, was super helpful. These new particles are not very dense. So it's very difficult. They're very small. So we are in the range of 25 nanometers. So we actually do really small particles, but they are not very dense. And that combination of being really small and not very dense is a real challenge for any kind of imaging of these particles. And we ran into quite a challenge to get this done. And we're still working with the colleagues in Barcelona, but they have access to a broader set of tools than you would easily find with one other partner on a CRO basis, the academic environment, which is super helpful, right? Probably at some point in time, we would repeat certain assays on a CRO level for submissions, potentially, but having access and having that early test and also the scientific expertise is really helpful.
Okay, that's great. And you were able to choose different partners and services. You're not locked into all the services from the PHOENIX-OITB partners, as I understand.
Yes, so as we were already in the clinic with the iron-based particles, we stayed with our regulatory framework, for example, right? The PHOENIX-OITB offers regulatory support as well, but for us it was much easier to stay with the regulatory frame we already had established, the partners we had there, and that was easy, right? We just had a quick conversation to check whether there's any additional support which would complement what we have, but then decided it's easier if we just stay with where we are, but use all the rest of the PHOENIX. And I would be confident if we would run into issues with our current partner, I could go back and activate also the regulatory support if we would need.
Okay, so the PHOENIX-OITB offered a lot of flexibility in terms of choosing services, it sounds.
Yeah. Yes, that was also for the lab work, for example. At some point in time, we realized that using different technologies, we were more confident with our internal technology and then continued on our end, which, of course, as being a demo case with the funding from the European Union was super helpful to help us do that as well. But we were able to test both. And in the beginning, we didn't know which one would be the right one. And that was important.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about the process of working with this single entry point for PHOENIX and deciding which services to take advantage of and which services would fit with your work?
So when I joined TOPAS a bit more than 2 years ago, the lab work with my biotech was well established and ongoing. I was well taken up. It was easy for me to get into that overall framework. And then within the OITB, there are these work packages focused on certain topics, and it's very easy to actually join those calls and get in and then talk to the respective work package leaders to see what support they might get, talk to the specific experts. So I didn't feel it was any kind of super formal process, any kind of difficult process. It was a conversation among scientists to find the right collaboration level. Was smooth.
Very good. So the PHOENIX-OITB partners have founded the Single Entry Point, which is a GmbH, a company. And in the future, customers to PHOENIX will be given a project manager from the Single Entry Point who will then discuss all the services and help them choose. Can you imagine that this is an advantage for future customers to have this Single Entry Point to direct them to different services?
Project management support definitely is an advantage too, because it's a network, right, which is behind the single entry point. The earlier the company, the bigger the advantage probably, right? The more external network you've already built yourself, you can probably deal better if you would not have that project management support. But for an early company, I think it is really helpful to have one person to talk to initially at least, and one person to help coordinate things. I know if you need electron microscopy pictures, you would probably still talk directly to the experts scientifically, but for the coordination, that's super helpful. It's what we do internally as well, right? We have one project manager for the whole development program who is taking care of all the coordination, updates, plans, reporting. I don't know, there's quite a bit of things around a project like this, and I definitely think that's a good idea.
Okay. And are there other companies that you think would benefit from the services of PHOENIX in similar ways that you did? What kinds of companies who could benefit the most, would you say? As you mentioned, the smaller companies, of course, would benefit from this single entry point.
So if you look at the landscape for nanoparticles and look at what you would do if there would not be a PHOENIX, what are the alternatives, right? You would sign up with Merck or Evonik or any other nanoparticulate development program. We looked at them. It's quite costly. So you're quickly in a comparably big budget expense there, number one. And number two, you probably need to know more yourself on what exactly you need and how you want to do it if you talk to these people. So I think having this more scientific environment and network, it definitely helps people, I think, who would still need a bit more help shape exactly what they need, right? If someone comes and already says, I exactly need this kind of particle, this composition, I want to test this and that, they can probably go to a CRO as well. But if a startup comes and says, like we were in the beginning, do the same just without the iron, where you need to figure out how to do it, and you're early, I think that's a good fit.
Yeah, that sounds like a real benefit. Then I would say thank you so much, Christian, for the interview, and we wish you a lot of luck with the final validation.
Thank you.
And please keep us updated of how your progress is going.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.